Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to Solidarity in the Age of Social Distancing, COVID-19 and Our Stretched Social Fabric. This conversation is presented by Capita. Capita is a creative space founded in 2018 to explore how the great social and cultural transformations of our day affect young children and their families. And we're very pleased to be able to convene this conversation with three very interesting and engaging panelists who have a particular perspective to bring to the context in which we are all now living. The word unprecedented has been used with unprecedented frequency over the last several days, but I think we can all agree that these are indeed unprecedented times. And it is our interest here at Capita to help us orient or reorient ourselves in light of these transformations that we're experiencing with great rapidity, to reorient ourselves to what matters most, and in particular to what matters most for the flourishing, the well-being of our children, our families, and our communities. You should have access or have seen through the Big Marker webinar platform the bios for these speakers today, and so we're not going to rehearse them, and we're going to jump right into Q&A with them. Our plan for today is to have about 20-25 minutes of dialogue and reflection with these folks, and then to turn to your questions. And so in the chat box, you will see a way in which to send us your questions. We ask that you use that so that we can hear directly from you. And with that, I'm going to turn first to Maria Romero from KnowledgeWorks. Maria, our recent forecast that we published in collaboration with KnowledgeWorks, Foundations for Flourishing Futures, identified stretched social fabric as a key domain of change over the next 10 years. Could you please summarize for us these changes as we articulated them several months ago in the forecast, and how some of what we might have pointed to is coming to fruition sooner than we anticipated even?
Yes. Thank you, Joe. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Thank you for having me. So stretched social fabric was one of those key domains that while researching about the future of young children and their families, it just seemed, so fundamental to the development of individuals and even communities. So we resolved to have it as one of our key foundations for the future, but also because we've noticed shifts impacting the systemic supports for families, including the trust in resources, organizations, information sources also, and as well as shifts in family configurations. So that could be either like demographic changes or also because, for example, pandemics are forcing families to like interact differently and understand the realities different. So in light of that, we understood that there are two ways in which two like main forces that are resulting from that. And so one is going to be that families are self-organizing and like figuring out ways to get through difficult times, such as the one that we are currently living. But then also that governments and traditional institutions are finally looking at families and the ways to support them more seriously and more also holistic. So, for example, we just heard from the current administration that they are considering giving some sort of monetary benefit per family or per individual. and that was something that was, disregarded as important or relevant not too long ago with like Andrew Yang's political campaign as being kind of like out of time. But now it's being like widely considered as the only way or one of the only ways to support families. So we can see how what is happening right now with COVID-19, it's in some ways accelerating the conversations that we would have over the next 10 years related to systemic supports to family and how that impacts our stretched social fabric.
Great. Thank you, Maria. Michael, in the last 10 days, we've seen a rapid change in how and where people are working. What are you observing from this acceleration, both at switchyards and as we think about the future of work more broadly?
Yeah, so switchyards has been a place up until this past Monday. Switchyards has been a place where kind of a clubhouse for people who have been working from home, working remote, to kind of hang out, to interact and be around people. So obviously we've been seeing for the last 6 months and also for the last few years kind of what the future of work looks like and how people are working. But what's interesting is work from home is obviously a buzzword this week and during this specific time. But it's still a very small percentage of people that actually work from home. I mean, the stats are very small. It's growing like crazy. I think what's going to happen now with this pandemic is that that's going to be accelerated, of course. You have a very large percentage of kind of knowledge work that's now being done from home. And so that'll accelerate the companies that are doing it. Historically, I think it's been companies that are on the forefront of kind of work, which tend to be startups, creative firms, freelancers, which those are the people that have worked from home recently. I actually have friends that work at companies and their offices historically have been resistant to kind of remote work because they're scared. This is pre the coronavirus. They're scared of their culture going away if they kind of get rid of their office. So I think what this will do is accelerate the amount of people that now say, wow, I actually can work from home. I actually have been somewhat productive. I've actually, life goes on. I've been able to do work at home from, all of the technology that we have, including, things like this, being on kind of doing a virtual panel. So I think that'll accelerate that a lot. So what happens now post coronavirus is I think you'll have a lot of companies starting to take a harder look at what the office means. And so I like to say a lot that work historically has been a thing that you do and a place that you go. This week and maybe for the next few weeks, work is just a thing that you do. It's not necessarily a place that you go. And so that dynamic changing, I think, is has huge implications. I mean, I'll give you just one example is, I live in Atlanta where the traffic is, notoriously bad. Not having to go to a physical place means I probably save an hour a day of sitting in my car. So what can I do with that hour? Can I hang out with my kids? Can I exercise? Can I do more work? So there's lots of things in that front. Another thing is, and obviously people are trying to distance themselves, but if we weren't in the epidemic right now and you had a lot of people working from home, you have people that are spending more time in their neighborhood, which means potentially more connections, more time spent with your neighbors, which I think in an office work world, you might have less and less time for when you have a busy day and then you have a commute and then you get home and you just barely have time to kind of maybe eat dinner and hang out with the family. So I think that allows for some more time with family, with neighbors. And so those are some of the interesting implications that we will see over the next few weeks.
Great. Wonderful. Ian, in the last few days, you and your colleagues at the Human Network Initiative at Harvard have launched a mutual aid hub to help people help one another through this crisis. Tell us about that initiative, but also what you, from your vantage point, with the Human Network Initiative are starting to see emerge around the country in terms of how we are taking care of each other.
Great, thanks, Joe. Yeah, so our little outfit at the medical school, we think a lot about the role that people's personal networks play in their general well-being and their physical health. We think a lot about what social isolation does to the body, to the brain, to one's psychological well-being. So when it became clear that social distancing was going to be what we needed to do to contain this, we immediately started to think about, okay, what happens 3 weeks into the social distancing regime? What happens to people who can't get out? What happens to people who can't get themselves to the store to access groceries, etc.? And I happened to log on to this app called Nextdoor, which some of you might be familiar with. And there was a guy who I've now become friends with, who named Jeff Howe, who was saying, "Hey, listen, we should organize in Cambridge. We should figure out a way that we can take care of people who are shut in and need help." So I reached out to him. We met almost immediately. We kept a safe distance apart. And since then, Jeff has really been off to the races. He's been coordinating with groups. I think now we're up to something like 13 communities around Boston, where people are working hard. They're putting in some serious hours to build infrastructure so that when things do get rough, right, in a few weeks when everyone's freezer and pantry isn't so well stocked, we have the groundwork in place so that we can find out about who needs things and find safe ways to get them what they need. So I've been just really impressed and moved by how excited people are to do this stuff. We have had the opportunity to interact with some people from city and state government. And honestly, I would say that the citizens we're hearing from and interacting with are thinking more quickly, and they're thinking further ahead than a lot of the people whose official job it is to take care of this stuff. I think it's immensely promising. I think there is a tremendous amount of underemployed human capital in this country. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what shape it will finally take, but I'm hopeful that, the situation where we can't rely on those sort of centralized resource providers, right? Where like Amazon is not going to be able to take care of all of us, and Instacart and Grubhub. These decentralized services are going to be overwhelmed. We've had the luxury and the problem of being able to rely on these things for some years now. But as they break down and people are forced out into their communities to help, we'll see. I really hope we can build some habits that will last after this period.
So Ian, on that point, what would those habits be? And I think about them as habits of solidarity and trust.
Sure.
But let's get concrete about what those might be.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, so it's pretty easy to think of what might be necessary in the next few weeks or the next few months, right? Getting medicine from the store, having enough to eat, who knows how well our utilities will hold up. Maybe there'll be other kinds of help we'll need. But after that, I guess maybe it's a little hard to put into just concrete words. I mean, a more communal, neighborhood-centric way of life, less sort of hanging to ourselves in our own homes and getting food delivered to us, and more helping neighbors and eating with them, and that sort of stuff. I know that's a little vague.
Thank you, Ian. Michael, I was interested, you talked about organizational culture. And I could imagine that if I'm CEO of a business with 25, 30 employees that are now all working from home and are working from home for the foreseeable future, that the context of that organizational culture might change. However, you're an entrepreneur. You have started things from scratch. So I'm interested in your perspective in terms of how we might build organizational cultures in new businesses moving forward in this social distancing regime?
Yeah, I think getting good at remote work is an entire culture that doesn't just happen overnight. I think basic things that you do in person, change, right? From just being able to see people, knowing, this person came in at this time, or this person left at this time. So it drastically changes the culture of a company to go remote work, especially what we're doing right now, which is 100% of the time. And so there's a few companies across the country that are kind of leaders in this front, a few startups, and they've written, they're pretty vocal about what it takes to work remote in a way that's strong, and you have to make up for some things. And so I'll give you an example. There's a company that actually, I'm good friends with the founder, and they'll do video chats. They were doing this pre the coronavirus. They would do, they're dispersed throughout the country, and they will do video calls just to say, how's it going? That you wouldn't have had that in-person meeting for 30 minutes just to catch up and say, how's it going? Because you might take that for granted. You'd say, I see them all the time. They're in the office next door to me. No need to have just when we're passing each other, we'll say, how's it going? What'd you do this weekend? That kind of stuff. Well, you have to be so much more intentional in the work environment to kind of force those interactions. And one is just scheduling a video chat just to say, hey, for 30 minutes, how's it going? What's going on? So you have to be intentional about that now. It's not going to just happen in serendipitously. So that's one. I think I made this note here that I genuinely believe that there is going to be a wave of companies that come out of this time period that do two things. One, they're creating the future Zooms of the world, or big markers of the world. So they're creating products that we might not have thought we needed, just a couple of weeks ago. So I think there's going to be a bunch of those that happen. There will also be a bunch of companies that this accelerated their work from home existence, and they said, you know what, there's some benefits to this, and we're just going to continue on. We're going to get better at it, but we're going to continue on in this way. So I do think there's going to be a lot that comes from this. Just as an example, I think all of the startups that are thinking through how to deliver, telemedicine. The most recent few times that I've gone to a doctor's office, I would say they're not just caught up to the times. They might be 10, 15 years behind from a technology perspective. And I think now they're being forced to use some of the tools that we're all using to kind of deliver that care. So I think there will be a whole wave of startups that, one, will be working remote, and two, will be creating the products to enable a remote work environment. Another thing that it completely opens up is being able to hire people from all over the world. And so I was actually just listening last night to a podcast and the founder is based in Missoula, Montana. And his take was, I can hire people. He was previously based in Silicon Valley, but he said, I can now hire people anywhere throughout the world. So it's completely changed my hiring practices. I'm not just looking in my local geography anymore to hire.
Thanks very much, Maria. I'm curious. In the forecast, we talked about there's a real desire for large-scale solutions to large-scale problems, right? But there's also declining trust, declining level of trust, particularly in institutions. Yuval Levin has written about this most recently. And frankly, there's been, as we've seen in the last week or two, some incompetence from large-scale institutions to respond to a challenge, a threat from outside that they're needing to be nimbly responding to on behalf of citizens. And so I'm just interested in your thoughts, drawing on the forecast, how we might balance the desire for the large-scale solutions with the declining trust in those in the institutions that can deliver solutions at scale?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question there, because so both the institutions and the kind of top bottom and bottom down up approaches are both trying to resolve and aim like the same need, that it's to serve families better, to ensure that their resilience, to ensure that they are able to develop and flourish. However, because of the nature of their approach, they have different ways to get to that goal. So while like family self-organizing, they can only do it at a lower scale, at least at the beginning, because they're focusing on trying to figure it out, like their specific needs and what that means to their community, maybe, or also understanding like what's their current situation. So, for example, Ian was mentioning Nextdoor was working for him where he is at, and I've also been using Nextdoor, and some other people in the chat has been mentioning that, but not all of us have access to cell phones, reliable internet, so that might not be a scalable solution for all of us. So we need to understand that, and some other neighbors might need to go all the way back to like just having like letters and put the signs on neighbors to let them know what's going on, or something, because maybe like the elderly are not, like they're not as tech savvy as we are. So we need to understand and try to understand our communities and take advantage of what we have around us to make it work. But then on the other side, we also have the top bottom approach, which should be more related to those systemic supports for families. So, for example, there's been a lot of conversations about like what we could have done back in January. But honestly, like, it's not only about January, but what we could have done maybe 3 years before, because this has been a scenario that has been talked about before, not the COVID-19 specifically, but what about superbugs or a larger pandemic that could impact different aspects of our lives. So it could be something that if we put buffers in our system that make it more resilient, uh, it it could serve not only a few but all, and that's something that I know some of the measures right now are trying to address, and the measures unfortunately are not working for everyone at the same time, but they are just trying to go for like the majority or the average for now, and then hopefully they will follow up with more specific measures that would also address those that are more vulnerable, like homeless, or that cannot have lower incomes, of have been discriminated out of the other policies before. So that's kind of where we're at.
We'll come back to you a second and get you to respond to something that Michael talked about, and that is hiring. I have another colleague friend who works with somebody he's never met in person before. That colleague lives in Russia, and I'm just interested in how we might balance the opportunity to hire somebody who lives anywhere in the world for talent to really benefit us all, no matter where that person with those talents lives, but also the need to be in person to cultivate habits of solidarity and cooperation in the workforce, right? We need to have some levels of cooperation and collaboration to work well together. And a lot of that is built upon being together. So just curious for you as a philosopher of culture in particular, right? Thinking both about organizational and institutional cultures, but what that could also do to our broader culture and the culture that we built around work.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting future to imagine, where a lot of our professional lives are conducted digitally. right? Like I have a set of colleagues who I work closely with, but they are not bodies for me, right? They are presences on a screen who do things I ask them to do and help me with things that I need help with. So that would be a new situation and one that we would need to adjust to. I think the obvious upside is it would give families more geographic flexibility. So I know a lot of people, who, when they start having children, for instance, would love to be near family, but their line of work just doesn't happen where their family lives, right? They have to be in one of these main urban hubs to find work, right? And there's other things that fall out from that. So there's the separation, the breakup of extended multi-generational families that results from that situation. And there's also a dynamic where places like where I live, Cambridge, the real estate prices get driven absolutely through the roof, because in order to do certain kinds of desirable work, you have to be in this area, right? And if you could do a lot of the work that gets done in Cambridge while living near your family in Montana, I mean, there's a lot that might be good about that. I don't know, I think we all have the experience of maybe wanting to do business with someone or wanting to make some kind of connection, and you're emailing, you're calling, and it's going okay. But then when you finally meet and have dinner together, okay, now everyone's ready to go. There's a different level of trust here. Right? So I think that's probably always going to be true. And it's probably always going to be part of our commercial lives and our professional lives, etc. But I don't know. I mean, it could be quite good in some ways. It could ease some of the economic pressure that's put on families. It could allow them to stay closer to family.
Great, thanks, Ian. And you mentioned another word which I want to focus in on for a moment, and that is multi-generational.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that this crisis may be exposing is a lack of intergenerational solidarity. Right? There have been all sorts of things on social media suggesting, this is a disease that is coming only for older people, and as a response, people who are younger don't need to care about it. They don't need to take precautions. They can be out having as good a time on spring break as they would any other year. Right. And so, I'm really interested in how, given what you just said, some of these tools can actually be leveraged to enhance a sense of intergenerational solidarity, which I think this crisis is exposing we lack.
Some of these tools, as in...
whether they be digital tools or tools related to just the capacities to live near one's family, leverage digital tools to work in Cambridge but live near one's family.
Okay, so that your grandmother isn't kind of left in the dust back in Montana while you go to the big city to make your way. Yeah, let's hope. It could go that way. I think there's lots of other dynamics at play here. We've got in the past several years since the big recession, there's a rebound of intergenerational family homes, which I think is wonderful. I think that's a nice arrangement. Unfortunately, it's happening mostly among young men who are kind of giving up on their job search and moving back in with mom and dad. And it's not impacting people over 65. They are not moving back in with their families. In fact, they are less and less living with their family, their extended families as the years go by. And I don't think that's just work patterns. I think there is some really deep-seated individualism in America, especially post-war America, where the assumption is that to need to depend on other people is a sign of failure and weakness, right? Like you leave your family's house, you go and sort of make your own home, and that's where you stay until you die, because you can stand on your own 2 feet. So I think some of that kind of almost macho, rugged individualism is a disease, frankly. And, I hope that in whatever way we can, that we can march it back a little bit. And yeah, maybe maybe a situation like this where everyone's vulnerability and need is undeniable, like it's just right out in the open. Hey, maybe it's a moment to affect a little bit of change in those attitudes.
Great. Thanks, Ian. I have one more question myself for our panelists, and then I'd like to turn to your questions. So this is just a reminder to please offer your questions for our panelists either in the chat box or in the Q&A box, which you should see just to the right of the chat. Also, wanted to just remind everyone that we are live tweeting, and so either in this conversation or later on today, please feel free to share your thoughts publicly using the hashtag #StretchedSocialFabric. So with that, I want to turn our attention to systems and policies. And this is really a question for all three of you. And it's a really, for me, the question is, how can we be more forward-leaning as we think about the development of public systems and public policies to ensure that we're not caught in future pandemics, which indications are with an increasingly globalized and warming world might increase. How can we ensure that we're not caught as unprepared as our public systems, our public policies seem to be for this particular moment? And are there habits in particular that we can develop at the public level, at the public systems level, the public policy level, to sort of grease the wheels for future crises, to ensure greater resilience? And Maria, maybe if you have thoughts, you can go first, since you brought up resilience and resilient systems in some of your previous remarks.
Yeah, it's not an easy question, and there's no silver bullet here. As I mentioned before, we need to be very aware of who we are individually and also as a community to make sure that these policies that are established are responding to our specific needs, and it's not just like a blanket for everyone, because usually when those kind of policies are put in place and they're ending not covering everyone, and that's one of the issues that we need to be aware of. So first thing would be to recognize that, as I said before, this situation, it's kind of forcing us to accelerate the conversations that were already started to happen. And it's even given us an opportunity to pilot some of the things that we've talked about. So, for example, some companies are now experimenting with working remotely. But then that could also be the case for online schooling from now on, given that schools are also switching to that kind of potential practices. So why don't we have, for example, more pilot policies that would let us try this sort of things beforehand, instead of having to just like react in moment of crisis? So I know that there's already some policy for states to try like innovative policies, but it's not right now. It's kind of limited to 7 states. So they need to apply to be able to be part of this pilot program. But that could be something that it could be established at different levels, for example, to help us help our institutions try different things without having to be kind of lower the risk that would come with like implementing some of these things just out of the gate. Another thing that we can do to increase the resilience in our communities would be to try to develop networks of support, like understanding just from like a physical, point of view, working as a network. Even if like one person goes down, then it doesn't mean that the whole network would go down. So that would also increase our resilience, and that could be something that could potentially be driven with both approaches, bottom down and top bottom. So it could be self-organized to some extent, but then kind of have the proper regulations and policy environment, so that could be scaled up slowly but surely in different communities, again recognizing what are their own limits and benefits.
That's great. I'm going to stop you there, Maria. Thank you. I want to give Michael and Ian an opportunity to respond to that question, and we have quite a few questions coming in on the chat from the audience, so I want to make sure we have plenty of time to get to those. Ian, Michael, any responses to this question on social public systems and public policies?
I just have a quick thought. I think both school and work will be two areas now that were mostly probably not done remote in a large way, that now have been impacted heavily. Medicine is the other, but I think school and work are two that, not to say that they will be prepared for this on the next time, but it's certainly been a crash course in how do we do this. And so I think we'll be more prepared the next time, for better or worse. People won't be caught off guard on being at home for an entire semester or an entire quarter and doing school that way or work that way. So we'll be more prepared. I don't have strong thoughts on the policy side of it, other than the fact that I don't think it'll be a surprise the next time this happens. I think we'll be more prepared, less of a kind of a culture shock.
Great. Ian?
Yes, I think that one thing that would help a lot with resiliency is if we had local resources on hand to take care of ourselves. If you hear the words locally sourced, it sounds kind of bespoke at this point, right? It sounds like Cambridge, Massachusetts, and people have the resources to want like a fancy dinner instead of a normal one. I think that is not necessary. It need not be that kind of a niche thing. And I hope that this reality here, where we're going to see how vulnerable global supply chains are, we're going to see how vulnerable centralized sort of centers of production and resource are. I hope that it will encourage governments and citizens and local governments to think more about not just always greasing the skids for centralization and offshoring and globalization, but trying to keep some of the things we need kind of close at hand.
Great thought. We have quite a few questions that have been coming in, and so I want to try and get to as many of these as possible. Julie asks, where currently are the best examples in the country or in the world where social solidarity is being done well? What are some strong examples to maybe look into? And these questions are for anyone who wants to answer.
So to me, for example, the best case that I've seen of social solidarity would be to stay inside and take the social distancing seriously. So South Korea has been a great example in that regard. There have been several articles written about it, and how something like 80% of their outbreak was caused by one person who didn't respect the social distancing and isolation measures. So that's how different and drastic it could be, like whether you take it or not. So
great, thank you. I'm going to press on here. David Willis asks about the relational needs of infants, young children, and their parents who must try to work virtually, yet their children need relational time. How do we promote the relational needs of families and ensure that they're supported? And Ian, maybe you can take a stab at answering this one first, since I've interacted relationally with your child. So.
Yeah. So how do we support parents? That's the the gist of it? How do we support parents and their
Yeah,
needs?
and the relational needs, and in particular the relational well-being and health of their young children, which is built through parent-child interaction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have all sorts of ideas about this. I think we should pay one parent to stay home for the first 3 years of a child's life. I think you and I might be simpatico on that. I think that the 15 different things that have colluded to make the two earner family really necessary for most families, I think have been quite bad. And we need to push back on those as best we can to give families the option to be there with their child, nurturing them. I do think that remote work could be a nice step in this regard. I think, realistically, even when you're in the office, you're not working 9 straight intense hours a day, right? And when you're working from home, you're not either, right? You can take a little time to make lunch for your child and to relate to them a little bit. So that could be a small and quite feasible way that, we could enable parents a little better.
Grady asks about local economies and how this crisis might shift our thinking on local economies and self-sufficiency. Ian, you started to address this, I think, in your question. Maria, or your answer to a previous question. Maria, Michael, anything you all would add? Michael, I'm in particular curious to hear from you as somebody who owns a business that is local to Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing about local businesses relates to kind of the food and beverage industry. It seems like those are the ones that are most hit right now and the most local. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the world looks like, 2 months from now from a local perspective. I mean, I've seen all kinds of numbers about how bleak it's been in terms of restaurants and establishments like that are truly local. So I do think those local businesses are gonna suffer big time. And things like I've seen buying gift cards from restaurants and all that. I just don't know that that's enough. I think that's a great effort, and I've seen the amount of websites that I've seen spun up just in the last couple of days around buying gift cards for local restaurants is astonishing. But I don't know if that's going to be enough. But I think that's a good start. I do think you're going to have some local businesses that rethink how they can kind of stay afloat. So I saw a really interesting example today of a restaurant turning into a general store. So literally in a 1 week period of time, kind of pivoting on their model of being a proper restaurant and becoming this kind of neighborhood general store, which will deliver kind of the basics. I don't know how successful that's going to be, but that's an impressive turnaround and a pretty creative way to kind of stay relevant during this time period. So I think you're going to see some of those businesses get creative in that way. But I think these local businesses, us being one of them, are kind of the ones hit the hardest, and the ones that don't have a year's worth of cash sitting in the bank. So those will be the ones hit hardest, and I think hopefully the ones that we're all kind of supporting and helping as much as we can.
Great. Maria, Ian, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, and I just think that even like the definition that we have of local economy might shift, just because how local is local enough. So, for example, I might stop going to the restaurant in the city, but now I'm buying eggs on my with my neighbors, like of my neighbors, and also like someone is getting sauerkraut made for the neighbors, like to sell to the neighbors. So I can see this like emerging entrepreneurial kind of practices coming out as the result of the crisis. So maybe that is like the new local economy that we are seeing.
Really interesting. Great. How local is local? in the midst of this. I mean, I think we've already seen, right, just in the under the social distancing expectations, our worlds have shrunk considerably, right? And now even where we live in the mountains of Western North Carolina, to go 10 or so miles to the grocery store is frankly a big trip now. It's something that I sort of think more about than I did even a week ago. And so that local grocery store no longer feels as local as it did last week, right? There's an interesting question here from Matthew Finn about shared in-person experiences. And I really think this question is an invitation to consider some other futures, and one that relates to family life and family formation, frankly, is dating. How are we going to come together if this social distancing regime continues as long as some experts are now suggesting it might, up to 18 months. So Maria, maybe as the futurist on the panel, have you given any thought to some of these other futures as they relate to other domains and sectors?
Yes, so there's actually a lot of technology being developed in the realm of dating, matching, love, and all that, lust too. Uh, so there could be different approaches there. Some are already saying that in 9 months from now we're going to start seeing a boom of babies because as a result of the social isolation. So or social distancing, because then couples are spending more time together. There's not a whole lot to do, so maybe that's going to happen. But also there's already been some messaging around putting especially blind datings on hold to some extent, because you don't really know where this person has been, whether they are tested positive or negative. So particularly until we don't get widespread testing for COVID-19, I think it's going to be really hard at just to build new relationships. Once we have widespread testing and you can know for sure who has it and who doesn't, then you might be able to then return to that dating, or even just going again to visit family or friends after each of you get your test results back.
So I'm interested in that in terms of what we were saying earlier about trust and how we build trust, and how one sort of health profile, if we could call it that, might now become something that we have to share, that we need to share as a means of building trust and relational reciprocity. Ian, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what that world might look like, bringing together both sort of our need to expose something of our health and well-being, but also what that might mean for privacy and autonomy.
Yeah, we're a few days into this right now, and it's not clear to me how this feels to us and how it looks to us in 3 months. So I'll say that, but I'll also say that people will be reckless. People want love. They want sex, and I don't think it's become very common for people to request papers showing that you don't have an STD before engaging in sex. So I'm not, and especially because COVID-19 doesn't seem to have, at least yet, a really significant impact on younger people. They'll catch it, but it's not so devastating for them. It's not immediately obvious to me that we're going to go into a sexual dating lockdown as a result of this. I think probably will continue more or less as we have been. Could be wrong.
Thank you. We have a few other questions here. One from Seamus. In the current crisis, what are some ways you see local municipal government failing or succeeding? What are some ways in which local governments might coordinate with and help initiatives citizens have started on their own? And I'm interested in this question because obviously in our media saturated environment, we hear just about every word from the federal government. But curious where you all live across the country, what you're seeing from local governments.
The city that I live in Atlanta, about 15 minutes, 20 minutes outside of downtown Atlanta, the mayor of the city actually declared before anyone else, before the governor of Georgia, before the mayor of Atlanta, closing all restaurants and bars. And I got a few texts from friends saying, hey, what happened specifically in the city that you live in, which is called Brookhaven? And I think it was just the mayor saying, hey, this is an opportunity for me now. This is what I believe to be the right thing to do. And at the smallest possible level, a small couple of 1,000-person city, he made that move to kind of shut down the restaurants and bars in our city. And so I think that was just an interesting, it didn't happen at the bigger level, but it happened at the smallest, city level. So I thought that was an interesting move.
Great. Maria, Ian, anything you'd like to add?
So here in Texas, I am currently living in New Braunfels, Texas, and I just received the news that they have found the first COVID-19 case in Comal County, which is the county that I'm in, and because of it, then now the county is declared like a disaster state or emergency. So actually, the way that I found out about it was again through Nextdoor, so through like the neighborhood, because the local news are more focused on the federal level kind of communication. So I think we need to be careful with what we're hearing on our social media or other ways of communication locally. Like I understand that we need to get that information that's timely and local, but we also need to make sure that we are getting accurate information. So make sure to whatever you're getting from neighbors or from even friends or family, you are kind of double checking for the source or who's saying. If you can find like another source that it's saying the same thing, maybe that would be a good way to contrast, because otherwise we could get really lost in this confusion. So
Thank you. Ian,
Sure. So, hey, Seamus. Couple of things that I've seen and just my brief exposure. One is I alluded to before that local governments just haven't been on a war footing, vis-a-vis a potential pandemic. So they don't necessarily have plans in place or infrastructure in place to be thinking 5 steps down the road. The initiative that I heard about in speaking to some local government people was related to how to get people to practice social distancing, right? Just how to get them in their homes, get them to stop going to bars and such, which is definitely important. But that's step one. That will happen. They'll go inside pretty soon, I think. And then what happens in 3 or 4 weeks after that, once they're inside? I haven't seen yet local governments that are kind of working on that right now. But the other thing I've seen is that if you step up and show initiative, they seem quite interested in working with citizens. So if you bring them, a well thought out, well organized plan, in my tiny bit of experience, they're going to be interested in hearing you out and in maybe collaborating. So I think at least in many cases, the door is probably pretty wide open for citizens to take some of these things into their own hands and have local governments come alongside them.
Great. So we have about 5 minutes remaining, and in that time, I just want to ask you all for a brief concluding thought. And I would like if you could, for us to do some degree of thinking ahead, some prediction, and in particular, what this experience right now, and of course, this is very early days. We're basically 3 days to a week into this, but what this experience now might mean for our young children when they are in high school, when they're in college, and when they are adults. So, just some prediction on the impact on the trajectory of our young children and their families.
I'll kick it off. So I think one strong belief that I have, and I had this belief before the pandemic, so I don't know if this is me hoping or wishing, or maybe it's even a stronger belief now. But I have a strong belief that there will be a huge desire to connect in person after this, even more so than I felt before. I think in person does certain things better than we can do this, on a computer. And so I think the things that can only be done in person, I mean, dating was mentioned earlier, conversation, brainstorming ideas, laughing, those types of things are gonna be even stronger after in person. I think first place, which is home, second place, which is work, there's going to be a blending of those two. So I think it'll be less clear what's first and second place going forward. And I think the same thing's going to happen at work, where working from home is good for certain things. You can send emails all day long from home. You can deep focus at home as well as anywhere potentially. And then I think work, that second place, the in-person, is really good at certain things. And we're going to have those certain things in person, whatever those things are. And so ultimately, I think this is going to make us more efficient because we're having to separate these things now on what can I do well on my computer at home, and what do I seek and desire by being around people. And so I think that time together in person is going to be more valued. There's going to be a huge desire for it. And I think it's going to be more efficient when we do spend time together.
Great. Maria?
Yes. So one of the things that I have thought of, well, first, we don't like to think about predictions, but more possibilities. So you can have different possibilities, and they can even be contradictory among them. So one of those possibilities that I can envision is the aftermath on our mental health. Just because we are being kind of put into not only a stretched social fabric, but also a stressed social fabric, like dealing with this unknown and uncertainty is going to have impacts that we cannot currently anticipate how far they're going to go. But seeing what's happening with empty shelves at the grocery stores and things like that can trigger traumatic experience in the past for some, especially those who have been in the past in areas of conflict or war, that they can relate to what happened then. So even when it doesn't make sense and it's not like a rational response, it could become more of a widespread issue. And also that the children today are going to have this as kind of a reference as a generational traumatic experience, because they are now going to have to not go to school for weeks or months. So that is going to like impact their lives, even if they cannot fully understand what is going on right now. So it's going to be one of those things that it's going to bond this generation, but also it's going to mark them forevermore. So we'll see how they respond to that, Mark. On the other hand, I think because they are subject, and we are being subject to this type of emergency or crisis, we can also start to develop more empathy for other countries or people that this is their normal. Again, those who live in war zones or conflict areas where this uncertainty is just their day to day. So that I think it's a bright spot to look forward to in the future.
Great, thank you, Ian. Quickly.
Sure. So I think this could be a moment when the brakes get pumped a little bit on our recent, past several years expectations that technology is going to take care of us and protect us, right? And we can sort of outsource our own sort of abilities to centralized tech hubs, kind of just pawn that off on someone else. I think you're going to see more realization that we need to maintain some local skills and local responsibilities and local capacities. So maybe a bit of a reduction in a sort of almost techie utopianism moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you very much to all three of you for taking the time to be with us today, and thanks to all those who gathered. Michael, I just want to, as a concluding thought, build on something that I think you were gesturing towards, and that is that this moment that we are all experiencing now might, in fact, be the foundation for the relational revolution that we need, for a revolution that we have called for at Capita to not only help to rebuild the social fabric, but to ensure the ecosystem of healthy relationships in which our children and families are nourished and will flourish. So let's appreciate all of you, and I appreciate your hopeful notes. I appreciate your cautious notes. And I know that we can, with recommitment to solidarity and to taking care of one another, we can get through these very weird times. So with that, thank you all very much. Thank you again to our presenters, and we look forward to being in touch with all of you here at Capita as we continue to move our work forward. So have a great afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.